Let me ask you a question that many people never stop to consider. What are your words saying about what you truly believe? Not what you claim to believe when everything is going well. Not what you say during moments of inspiration, but what comes out of your mouth when pressure rises, when challenges appear, when answers seem delayed, and when circumstances are not cooperating with your expectations. Because in those moments, your words reveal something powerful. They reveal the condition of your heart. Many people underestimate the importance of their words. They view speech as nothing more than communication. They think words are simply ways to describe situations, express emotions, or share opinions. But words do far more than describe life. Words help shape the way we experience life. They reveal what we have accepted internally, and they reinforce those beliefs every time they are spoken. That is why faith-filled words are so powerful. Your words are constantly working in one of two directions. They are either strengthening faith or strengthening fear. They are either reinforcing confidence or reinforcing doubt. They are either building expectation or building discouragement, and the direction of your words often becomes the direction of your thinking. Think about how often people speak negatively without realizing the impact it has on them. They say things like, "Nothing ever works out for me. I'll probably fail again. I don't think things will ever change. I'm always struggling." At first, these may seem like harmless statements. They may even feel honest, but repeated often enough, they become more than statements. They become confessions. And confessions have influence, because every time a person repeats the same message, they strengthen its place within their thinking. The heart listens to what the mouth repeatedly says. If you continually speak defeat, your heart begins expecting defeat. If you continually speak fear, your heart begins expecting fear. If you continually speak limitation, your heart begins expecting limitation. The opposite is also true. When you consistently speak words that align with faith, confidence begins growing. When you consistently speak hope, expectation begins rising. When you consistently speak truth, your thinking begins aligning with that truth. This is why faith-filled words matter so much. Now understand something important. Faith-filled words are not about pretending problems do not exist. Faith is not denial. Faith does not ignore reality. Faith acknowledges challenges honestly, but faith refuses to let challenges become the final conclusion. There is a difference between recognizing a problem and surrendering to a problem. A person can acknowledge difficulty and still speak confidence. A person can recognize pressure and still speak hope. A person can face uncertainty and still speak faith. That is what makes faith-filled words different. They are not based solely on what is visible. They are based on what is believed. And belief influences speech. Think about two people facing the same challenge. One person says, "This situation is difficult, but I believe there is a way through." The other says, "This situation is impossible, and nothing will ever change." Both are looking at the same circumstances. Both are facing the same difficulty. Yet their words are moving them in completely different directions. One confession creates expectation. The other confession creates discouragement. One strengthens endurance. The other weakens confidence. This is why words matter more than many people realize. Now here is something powerful. Words not only reveal belief, they also reinforce belief. Every time you speak something, you hear it again, you become your own audience. And repeated messages influence the speaker as much as they influence the listener. That means your words are constantly training your mind. They are constantly shaping your expectations. They are constantly influencing how you interpret circumstances. If you spend every day speaking fear, fear becomes more familiar. If you spend every day speaking doubt, doubt becomes more natural. But if you spend every day speaking truth, truth becomes more deeply rooted. And eventually, what was once a deliberate choice becomes your natural response. Now think about how this affects difficult seasons. When challenges arise, people often speak whatever they feel in the moment. They allow emotions to dictate their confession. If they feel discouraged, they speak discouragement. If they feel afraid, they speak fear. If they feel uncertain, they speak doubt. The problem with this approach is that emotions change constantly. If your words always follow your emotions, your confidence will rise and fall with every circumstance. But faith-filled words create stability. They allow truth to become stronger than temporary emotions. They help you maintain focus when feelings fluctuate. They help you remain anchored when circumstances are unstable, and over time, this creates a stronger foundation within you. You become less controlled by fear, less influenced by discouragement, less shaken by delay. Why? Because your words have been reinforcing faith instead of reinforcing doubt. So pay close attention to what you are saying every day, because your words are not merely describing your life. They are revealing what you believe, and they are helping shape what you will continue believing. When your mouth consistently agrees with faith, your heart becomes stronger. When your speech consistently aligns with truth, your confidence becomes deeper. And when faith-filled words become your daily habit, they begin creating a mindset of expectation, resilience, and hope that remains steady regardless of what circumstances are trying to say around you. Let me speak directly to anyone who has ever looked at a situation and wondered, how can I keep believing when everything I see seems to be telling me the opposite? That question touches one of the greatest challenges in the life of faith. It is easy to speak confidently when results are visible. It is easy to believe when circumstances are improving. It is easy to remain encouraged when progress is obvious. But true faith reveals its strength when there is little or no visible evidence that anything is changing. This is especially true when it comes to healing. Many people begin with confidence. They hear promises, they pray, they believe, and they expect change. But then they look at their circumstances. They notice the same symptoms. They feel the same discomfort. They face the same challenges. And suddenly, a battle begins not just in the body, but in the mind. The question becomes, will I speak according to what I see, or will I continue speaking according to what I believe? That is where faith grows, because faith does not wait for visible proof before it speaks. Faith chooses its confession based on truth, rather than temporary appearances. Now understand something clearly. Speaking healing before you see, it is not pretending that symptoms do not exist. Faith is not denial. Faith does not require you to ignore reality. If something hurts, it hurts. If a challenge exists, if a symptom is present, it is present. Faith does not ask you to lie about those facts. Instead, faith asks you not to let those facts become the final authority over your expectation. There is a difference between acknowledging a condition and surrendering to it. Many people unknowingly surrender through their words. They say things like, "I guess this is just how it will always be. I'll never get better. Nothing is changing. There's no point hoping anymore." Notice what happened. The circumstance did not just influence their emotions, it influenced their confession. And once their confession changed, their expectation began changing too. That is why what you say during difficult seasons matters so much. Your words are constantly reinforcing either faith or fear. Every time you speak defeat, you strengthen discouragement. Every time you speak hope, you strengthen expectation. Every time you speak faith, you reinforce confidence. Now think about how healing works in the natural world. Very often, healing is a process. Improvement may happen gradually. Progress may occur beneath the surface before it becomes visible. Changes may begin internally long before they are obvious externally. Imagine a seed planted in the ground. The day after it is planted, nothing appears different. A week later, the soil may still look unchanged. But underneath the surface, development is already taking place. Roots are forming. Growth is beginning. Progress is happening, even when it cannot yet be seen. Faith often requires that same perspective. Just because you do not yet see visible evidence does not mean nothing is happening. And this is where confession becomes so important. Your confession helps maintain expectation during the waiting season. It keeps your focus on possibility instead of limitation. It reminds your heart that visible evidence is not the only evidence that matters. Now here is something powerful. People tend to move toward what they consistently expect. If someone continually expects defeat, they often become discouraged quickly. If someone continually expects disappointment, they lose motivation to persevere. But when expectation remains strong, endurance becomes stronger too. That is why speaking healing before you see. It is not merely about words. It is about protecting expectation. It is about refusing to allow temporary appearances to determine your final conclusion. Because appearances can change. Symptoms can change. Circumstances can change. But if you surrender your expectation too early, you may stop believing before the process has had time to unfold. Now let's talk about emotions. One of the biggest challenges people face is that emotions often follow circumstances. When they feel better, they become encouraged. When they feel worse, they become discouraged. When progress appears, they become hopeful. When progress seems absent, they become doubtful. This creates a cycle where confidence rises and falls based entirely on what is visible. Faith breaks that cycle. Faith allows confidence to remain steady, even when emotions fluctuate. Not because feelings are unimportant, but because feelings are not always reliable indicators of what is possible. There will be days when you feel encouraged. There will be days when you feel frustrated. There will be days when you feel strong. There will be days when you feel tired. If your confession changes every time your emotions change, your faith will constantly be unstable. But when your confession remains rooted in truth, stability begins to develop. And stability is powerful, because stability helps you continue believing when others would quit. It helps you maintain hope when others become discouraged. It helps you endure when results seem delayed. So if you are facing a situation where visible change has not yet appeared, remember this: Your confession matters most when circumstances are trying to convince you to speak differently. Anyone can speak faith after the breakthrough. Anyone can celebrate after the victory. Anyone can be confident after the answer arrives. But the true strength of faith is revealed when you continue speaking healing, hope, and expectation before visible evidence appears, because faith is not determined by what you see today. Faith is determined by what you choose to believe and confess while you are still waiting to see tomorrow. Let's talk about a truth that many people overlook. Deliverance often begins long before circumstances change. And one of the first places it begins is in your confession. Many people are waiting for freedom while continuing to speak the language of fear. They are hoping for victory while constantly rehearsing defeat. They are praying for change while agreeing with discouragement every day through their words. And without realizing it, they are strengthening the very mindset they want to escape. Now understand something important. Every day you are agreeing with something. You are agreeing with fear or faith. You are agreeing with hope or discouragement. You are agreeing with possibility or limitation. And whatever you continually agree with begins shaping the direction of your thinking. This is why confession matters so much, because your words reveal where your agreement is. Think about how often people speak from fear without even noticing it. They say things like, "I'll never get free from this. This problem is too big. I've tried before and failed. Nothing is ever going to change. What if things get worse?" At first, these may sound like harmless expressions of frustration, but repeated often enough, they become more than emotional reactions. They become agreements. And every agreement strengthens a belief. If fear is continually spoken, fear becomes more deeply rooted. If doubt is continually spoken, doubt becomes stronger. If defeat is continually spoken, discouragement gains influence. This is why deliverance begins with a change in confession. Because before circumstances change externally, agreement often needs to change internally. Now let's be clear about something. Changing your confession does not mean pretending problems do not exist. Faith is not denial. Faith is not ignoring reality. Faith does not require you to act as though challenges are absent. Instead, faith asks a different question. What am I agreeing with while facing this challenge? That question is powerful, because two people can face the exact same situation and have completely different confessions. One person says, "This is difficult, but I believe there is a way through." The other says, "This is difficult and there is no hope." Both acknowledge the challenge, but only one is agreeing with possibility, and agreement shapes expectation. Now, think about how fear operates. Fear rarely begins with a dramatic announcement. It often starts with a thought, a question, a concern, a possibility. What if this never changes? What if I fail again? What if things get worse? Those thoughts may seem small, but when they are repeated and spoken, they gain influence. Words give strength to thoughts. The more a fear is spoken, the more familiar it becomes. The more familiar it becomes, the more believable it feels. And eventually, a person can become trapped, not only by circumstances, but by the beliefs they have reinforced through repeated confession. This is why breaking agreement with fear is so important, because fear grows through agreement. When fear speaks and you continually repeat its message, fear gains authority in your thinking. But when you stop agreeing with fear, something begins to shift. Its influence weakens. Its control decreases. Its voice becomes less dominant. Now here is something powerful. Deliverance often begins the moment a person stops rehearsing defeat. Think about that. Many people rehearse their problems every day. They tell the same negative story. They repeat the same discouraging conclusions. They continually revisit the same fears. And without realizing it, they are strengthening those patterns internally. But when confession changes, a new pattern begins forming. Instead of speaking defeat, they begin speaking hope. Instead of speaking fear, they begin speaking confidence. Instead of speaking limitation, they begin speaking possibility. And over time, those new confessions begin creating new expectations. Now, understand that this process usually does not happen overnight. Years of negative thinking are rarely replaced in a single day. Patterns that have been reinforced for years often require consistent effort to change. But change is possible. Every time you choose a faith-filled confession, instead of a fear-filled confession, you are creating a new pathway. Every time you speak truth instead of defeat, you are strengthening a different mindset. Every time you refuse to agree with discouragement, you are weakening its influence. And eventually, those repeated choices begin transforming how you think. Now consider how this affects everyday life. A person who continually speaks fear often becomes hesitant. They avoid opportunities. They expect failure. They assume the worst there. Words shape their expectations. But a person who continually speaks faith begins expecting possibility. They remain open to growth. They continue moving forward. They refuse to let fear determine their future, not because challenges disappear immediately, but because their agreement has changed, and that change is powerful. Because agreement influences direction. Whatever you continually agree with will eventually affect how you live. So if you want freedom from fear, start by examining your confession. If you want victory over discouragement, pay attention to your agreement. If you want deliverance from defeat, listen carefully to what you are repeatedly saying. Because deliverance often begins before circumstances change. It begins when a person stops partnering with fear, stops agreeing with doubt, stops rehearsing defeat, and starts aligning their words with truth. And when that alignment becomes consistent, something remarkable happens. Confidence begins replacing fear. Hope begins replacing discouragement. Expectation begins replacing defeat. And the freedom that first started in your confession gradually begins transforming the way you think, the way you live, and the way you face every challenge that comes before you. Let's talk about one of the most powerful principles of faith. Mountains do not move because of occasional enthusiasm. Mountains move because of persistent declaration. Many people start speaking words of faith when they feel inspired. They hear a powerful message, experience a moment of encouragement, and boldly declare what they believe. But then a challenge appears. A delay comes. Circumstances seem unchanged. And suddenly, the words that once flowed with confidence begin to disappear. This is where many people miss an important truth. Faith is not measured by what you say once. Faith is revealed by what you continue saying when circumstances give you reasons to stop. Because persistent declaration is what separates temporary excitement from lasting conviction. Now think about a mountain for a moment. A mountain represents something that appears immovable. It is large, it is intimidating, it seems permanent. It stands in the way and blocks the view beyond it. In life, mountains come in many forms. Some people face mountains of fear. Others face mountains of discouragement. Some face mountains of delay. Others face mountains of uncertainty, disappointment, or repeated setbacks. And when people first encounter these mountains, their immediate reaction is often emotional. They feel overwhelmed. They feel frustrated. They feel discouraged. And because emotions are strong, their words begin reflecting those emotions. But faith teaches a different response. Faith does not allow the size of the mountain to determine the strength of the confession. Faith continues speaking truth even when the mountain still appears large. Now understand something important. Persistent declaration is not about trying to convince God of something. It is about maintaining your own alignment with truth. Every time you declare faith, you are reinforcing your focus. Every time you speak confidence, you are strengthening expectation. Every time you repeat truth, you are refusing to allow circumstances to become the loudest voice in your life. And that matters because whatever voice becomes dominant usually shapes your outlook. If fear becomes the loudest voice, fear influences your decisions. If discouragement becomes the loudest voice, discouragement influences your expectations. But when truth becomes the loudest voice, faith begins growing stronger. This is why persistence matters so much. One declaration can inspire you. Repeated declarations can transform you. Think about how habits are formed. No habit develops through a single action. Habits are created through repetition. A single workout does not create strength. A single lesson does not create mastery. A single day of discipline does not create lasting. Change, transformation happens through consistent repetition over time. Faith works the same way. A single confession is valuable, but persistent confession builds deep conviction. Now consider what happens when people stop declaring truth because circumstances remain unchanged. At first, they may still believe internally, but as days pass, they begin speaking less confidently. Their confession becomes weaker. Their expectations start shrinking. And eventually, discouragement begins influencing their perspective. Why? Because silence often allows fear to fill the space where faith once spoke. This is why persistent declaration is so important. It keeps truth active in your thinking. It keeps confidence alive in your heart. It keeps expectation moving forward, even when visible evidence is delayed. Now here is something powerful. Persistent declaration changes the person making the declaration. Many people focus only on changing circumstances. But one of the greatest effects of consistent confession is internal transformation. The more you speak truth, the more familiar truth becomes. The more familiar truth becomes, the more believable it feels. The more believable it feels, the stronger your confidence grows. Eventually, your confession is no longer something you are trying to convince yourself of. It becomes something you genuinely expect. And that shift changes everything because expectation influences behavior. People act differently when they expect good things. They persevere longer. They remain hopeful. They continue moving forward. Persistent declaration creates that kind of expectation. Now think about difficult seasons. When challenges continue, many people become tempted to change their confession. They begin speaking according to appearances rather than conviction. They start describing the mountain more than speaking to it. They focus on the obstacle more than the promise. And over time, the mountain grows larger in their perception. But faith-filled persistence does the opposite. It continually reminds the heart that the mountain is not the final authority. It continually reinforces the promise rather than the problem. It continually strengthens hope rather than surrendering to discouragement. Another important truth is that persistent declaration builds endurance. Endurance is not developed through comfort. It is developed through consistency during difficulty. Every time you continue speaking faith when circumstances suggest. Otherwise, you strengthen your spiritual resilience. You become less dependent on visible evidence, less controlled by temporary emotions, less influenced by discouraging situations. Why? Because your confidence is no longer tied solely to what you see. It is tied to what you believe. And over time, that creates stability. So if you are facing a mountain today, remember this: the power is not in a single emotional moment of confession. The power is in persistence. It is in continuing to declare truth when delays remain. It is in continuing to speak faith when emotions fluctuate. It is in continuing to align your words with what you believe, even when circumstances have not yet caught up. Because mountains are not overcome by temporary enthusiasm. They are overcome by unwavering conviction that refuses to stop speaking truth. And when persistent declaration becomes your lifestyle, you develop a faith that remains steady under pressure, confident in uncertainty, and strong enough to keep moving forward until the mountain is no longer standing in your way. Let's go deeper into a truth that quietly determines the strength or weakness of your entire faith life. Your mouth and your heart are always influencing each other, whether you realize it or not. Many people assume the heart is the only important part of faith. They say, as long as I believe in my heart, that's enough. Others go to the opposite extreme and focus only on words, repeating phrases without inner conviction. But real faith is never divided like that. Heart and mouth are connected. What is believed influences what is spoken, and what is spoken also reinforces what is believed. This is why alignment matters. When your heart and your mouth are not in agreement, tension is created internally. A person may say one thing, but feel another. They may declare faith outwardly, but internally entertain doubt. They may speak hope while rehearsing fear inside. And over time, that inconsistency weakens confidence. But when your heart and mouth begin moving in the same direction, something powerful happens. Stability begins to form. Faith becomes stronger. Expectation becomes clearer. And inner conflict begins to decrease. Now understand something very important. Alignment does not always happen instantly. It is often developed through repetition and intentional choice. There are moments when your heart feels uncertain, but your mouth can still choose to speak truth. There are moments when emotions feel unstable, but your confession can still remain steady. There are moments when thoughts are filled with doubt, but your words can still be anchored in faith. And over time, those repeated choices begin shaping the heart itself. This is one of the most important principles of spiritual growth. The mouth can lead the heart into alignment. Many people think the heart always leads the mouth, and that is partially true. But the reverse is also powerful. What you consistently say begins influencing what your heart gradually accepts. Think about how often people rehearse negative thoughts without realizing it. They repeatedly say things like, "This is not going to work," or "I don't see any way forward," or "Things never change for me." At first, these may simply feel like expressions of emotion, but when repeated, they begin forming agreement inside the heart, and agreement shapes belief. Now consider the opposite. When a person begins intentionally speaking truth, even before they fully feel that something begins to shift internally, the heart starts adjusting to what the mouth consistently declares. Not immediately, but gradually, not all at once, but over time. And that gradual shift is where transformation happens. This is why consistency in confession is so important, because inconsistency creates confusion, but consistency creates alignment. When your confession changes based on your emotions, your heart remains unstable. When your confession remains anchored in truth, your heart begins to stabilize. Now think about how this affects daily life. When challenges arise, people often speak whatever is strongest in the moment. If fear feels strong, fear comes out in words. If doubt feels strong, doubt becomes speech. If discouragement feels strong, it shapes confession. But faith grows when you intentionally choose words that align with truth rather than temporary emotion. And every time you do that, you are reinforcing alignment. Another important truth is that alignment creates clarity. When heart and mouth are disconnected, confusion increases. But when they begin to agree, clarity emerges. You start thinking more consistently. You start responding more calmly. You start expecting more steadily. And that stability becomes a foundation for growth. Now here is something powerful. Alignment is not just about what you say in public. It is also about what you say in private. Many people manage their words around others, but allow unchecked confession. When alone, they may speak faith outwardly, but rehearse fear internally in private conversations, thoughts, or reflections. But the heart is always listening. And whatever is repeatedly spoken, even in private, becomes part of internal belief. That is why consistency matters in every environment, because your internal world is shaped not only by what you declare publicly, but also by what you consistently repeat privately. Now consider what happens when alignment becomes strong. A person begins to notice that their words are no longer divided. They are not speaking one thing and feeling another in contradiction. Instead, their confession and belief begin moving together. There may still be moments of pressure, but there is no longer deep internal conflict. And that stability creates strength, because a divided heart produces instability, but an aligned heart produces confidence. Over time, this alignment begins influencing expectations. You begin expecting differently. You begin thinking differently. You begin interpreting circumstances differently, not because everything changes instantly, but because your internal agreement has changed. Now here is something very important. Alignment does not mean you never feel doubt or emotion again. It means those emotions no longer control your confession. You may still feel moments of uncertainty, but you choose not to let those moments define your words. You may still experience pressure, but you refuse to let pressure rewrite your belief, and that decision, repeated consistently, creates spiritual maturity. Because mature faith is not faith that never feels pressure. It is faith that remains aligned even under pressure. So when heart and mouth begin working together in agreement with truth, something powerful develops within you. Your confidence becomes steadier. Your expectation becomes clearer. Your inner life becomes more stable. And over time, your entire way of thinking begins shifting from reaction-based living to conviction-based living, where what you believe and what you say are no longer in conflict, but working together to strengthen your faith and shape the direction of your life. Let's go deeper into one of the most practical but often overlooked aspects of faith: refusing negative speech in difficult seasons. It is easy to speak well when life is going well, when circumstances are favorable, when answers are coming quickly, when doors are opening, and when emotions are stable. Positive speech flows naturally, but the real test of faith does not happen in easy seasons. It happens when pressure increases, when delays continue, when uncertainty grows, and when visible results seem slow or absent. That is when words matter most, because in difficult seasons, your speech becomes either a bridge to faith or a pathway into discouragement. Now understand something very important. Negative speech is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle. Sometimes it is quiet assumptions spoken under the breath. Sometimes it is repeated internal dialogue that eventually comes out in words. And sometimes it is disguised as just being realistic. But whether loud or subtle, negative speech has an effect. It shapes expectation. It influences belief. It reinforces internal agreement with fear rather than faith. Many people do not realize how quickly speech changes under pressure. At first, they may start with hope. They may begin with confidence. They may even pray with strong belief. But as time passes and results do not appear immediately, their words slowly begin to shift. They start saying things like, "I don't know if this will ever change. It's taking too long. Maybe nothing is happening. I've tried before and it didn't work. I guess this is just how it is." These statements may feel like honest reflections of frustration, but repeated often enough, they begin shaping internal belief more than people realize. Because words are not neutral. Words are formative. They form expectation. They form mindset. They form interpretation of reality. And when negative speech is repeated in difficult seasons, it slowly trains the mind to expect defeat instead of expecting possibility. Now think about how this affects endurance. When a person consistently speaks negatively, their emotional strength weakens over time. They become more sensitive to delay. They become more easily discouraged by obstacles. They become more convinced that change is unlikely. And eventually, they stop believing, not because circumstances proved them wrong, but because their own confession reshaped their expectation. This is why refusing negative speech is not just about discipline. It is about protection. You are protecting your expectation. You are protecting your mindset. You are protecting your internal agreement with truth. Now here is something important. Refusing negative speech does not mean denying that challenges exist. Faith is not pretending everything is perfect. Faith does not require you to ignore difficulty. If something is hard, it is hard. If something is painful, it is painful. If something is uncertain, it is uncertain. But faith asks a different question. What will I consistently say in the middle of this? Because acknowledging a challenge is one thing. Agreeing with defeat is another. A person can say, "This is difficult," without saying, "This will never change." A person can say, "This is taking time," without saying, "Nothing is happening." A person can recognize pressure without surrendering expectation. That distinction is critical. Now consider what happens when a person begins to guard their speech in difficult seasons. At first, it requires awareness. They notice negative thoughts forming. They catch discouraging words before they are spoken. They correct their confession intentionally. This requires effort. But over time, something begins to shift. Their mind starts becoming more disciplined. Their reactions become more stable. Their expectations become more anchored. Why? Because speech shapes thinking, and thinking shapes expectation, and expectation shapes endurance. Another powerful truth is that refusing negative speech creates space for faith to grow. Negative words crowd out hope. They reduce expectation. They reinforce limitation. But when those words are removed, something else begins filling that space: truth. And truth begins reshaping perspective. Instead of focusing only on what is wrong, attention begins shifting toward what is possible. Instead of rehearsing failure, the mind begins considering progress. Instead of assuming the worst, expectation begins opening toward better outcomes. Now think about difficult seasons again. They are often emotionally intense. Pressure can feel overwhelming. Delays can feel discouraging. Uncertainty can feel heavy. And in those moments, speech becomes extremely important. Because what you repeatedly say during pressure determines whether pressure breaks your confidence or builds your endurance. If negative speech dominates, pressure feels heavier. But if faith-filled speech is maintained, pressure becomes more manageable internally. Not because circumstances instantly change, but because your internal foundation remains stable. Now here is something powerful. Refusing negative speech does not just protect faith, it strengthens it. Every time you choose not to speak defeat, you are reinforcing discipline. Every time you choose not to agree with discouragement, you are strengthening expectation. Every time you replace negative confession with truth, you are building resilience. And over time, that resilience becomes noticeable. You begin responding differently. You begin thinking differently. You begin expecting differently. You become less easily shaken by delay and more anchored in truth. So in difficult seasons, the battle is not only external, it is also verbal. And your words become one of the most important tools in shaping your inner life. Because when you refuse negative speech and consistently choose faith-filled confession, you are not just speaking differently, you are training your heart to remain aligned with truth, even when circumstances are trying to push you toward discouragement. Let's bring everything together into one of the most important truths in the entire life of faith. Victory is not built in moments. It is built in lifestyle. Many people want breakthrough results, but they approach faith in isolated moments. They believe strongly when they pray. They speak boldly when they feel inspired. They expect change during moments of encouragement. But then life continues. Time passes. Circumstances remain unchanged for a while. And slowly, the intensity of their confession fades. This is where many people miss what true faith is meant to become. Faith was never designed to be an occasional experience. It was meant to become a way of life. A lifestyle of victory is not defined by what you say once in. A moment of inspiration. It is defined by what you consistently say when life continues normally, when emotions fluctuate, when challenges persist, and when visible evidence is not immediate. Now understand something very important. Daily confession shapes daily expectation. What you consistently say today is forming how you will think. What you repeatedly declare this week is shaping how you will respond next week. What you habitually speak is building the internal framework through which you interpret everything in life. That means victory is not something that suddenly appears without preparation. It is something that is gradually built through repeated alignment of words, thoughts, and belief. Many people underestimate the power of daily confession because they are looking for instant results. But faith operates on principles of consistency. Just like physical strength is built through repeated exercise, spiritual strength is built through repeated confession of truth. One positive statement does not transform a mindset. One moment of encouragement does not build deep conviction. One prayer of faith does not automatically create lasting stability. But daily, consistent confession begins reshaping the inner world. And the inner world eventually influences everything else. Now think about how habits work. No habit becomes strong overnight. It is formed through repetition. At first, it requires effort. Then it becomes familiar. And eventually, it becomes automatic. Faith confession works the same way. At first, it may feel intentional and disciplined. You may need to remind yourself to speak truth. You may need to correct negative thoughts. You may need to consciously choose your words. But over time, something begins to shift. Faith-filled speech becomes more natural. Expectation becomes more stable. Confidence becomes more consistent. And what once required effort begins to feel like identity. That is what a lifestyle of victory looks like. Now consider the opposite. When confession is inconsistent, expectation becomes unstable. One day a person feels strong in faith. The next day they feel uncertain. One moment they are confident. The next moment they are discouraged. And over time, that instability creates emotional exhaustion, because a life without consistent confession is a life without consistent direction. But when daily confession is anchored in truth, something powerful happens. Stability begins to grow even in unstable circumstances. Now here is something very important. A lifestyle of victory does not mean a life without challenges. It does not mean problems disappear instantly. It does not mean delays never happen. It does not mean everything becomes easy. Instead, it means your internal response remains consistent regardless of external condition. You are no longer defined by circumstances. You are defined by conviction. And conviction is built through daily confession. Another powerful truth is that lifestyle confession shapes identity. Over time, you begin to see yourself differently, not as someone easily defeated by challenges, but as someone anchored in truth. Not as someone controlled by fear, but as someone guided by faith. Not as someone reacting to circumstances, but as someone responding from conviction. And that identity shift is one of the greatest transformations that faith produces. Because once identity changes, behavior begins to follow. Now think about endurance. People who develop a lifestyle of confession are not easily shaken by temporary situations. They may feel pressure, but they do not lose direction. They may experience delay, but they do not abandon expectation. They may face uncertainty, but they remain anchored in truth. Why? because their confession is not based on momentary emotion. It is based on consistent belief, and consistency builds strength. Now here is something powerful. Victory is often the result of what you consistently refuse to give up on. Internally, many breakthroughs are not sudden events. They are the result of sustained internal alignment over time. Every day, you choose faith-filled confession. You are reinforcing expectation. Every day you choose truth over fear. You are strengthening conviction. Every day you choose consistency over emotion. You are building stability. And eventually, that internal stability begins producing external results. So a lifestyle of victory is not about occasional effort. It is about consistent alignment. It is about daily confession, shaping daily expectation. It is about choosing truth repeatedly until truth becomes the dominant influence in your thinking. And when that happens, something powerful develops within you, a steady, unshakable confidence that does not rise and fall with circumstances, but remains anchored in truth, shaping your thoughts, guiding your words, and producing a life that reflects endurance, expectation, and quiet confidence that victory is not just hope for it, is lived every day through consistent faith-filled confession.